My first question is, what part of your background will you pull from to best represent the citizens of Philadelphia?
Thank you. You know, I was a CEO at 26 years old in a nonprofit organization. After having done some community development work, when I was 15 years old, I was managing a $250,000 small community development corporation of Hunting Park CDC. I don't still know how I ended up doing that other than nobody else wanted to do it. And I was taking accounting in high school and I thought I was going to go into the accounting field. I have since changed my mind. But then, you know, fast forward, I took over an organization that was dear to my heart, which was Aspida. I was part of their leadership program. And I was on the board, and the organization was about to shut down. And going from board to executive director was a hard decision for me to make, but I couldn't see this organization who had made me fall apart. And so I decided to take the position knowing I probably won't get paid for a while, and I didn't. And I remember my husband saying to me, who was also a product of Aspida, saying, either you grow it and you think big, or you shut it down. And so we thought big. And that was during the charter school conversation. I worked with state officials, got the charter school law passed, and in the middle of 7 audits and staff reorganization, we started a charter school. We grew. We actually carried out some of the long-term mission and vision of the organization. So, you know, 26, executive director, making payroll in my neighborhood. And when I built the charter school, my office, I built it in the back. The new CEO, I'm sure, doesn't enjoy that. But it was because I could look out the window and see my mother at her house. And I just felt it was important that that whole building really reflected the challenges and then the opportunities that building that charter school did for my neighborhood of Hunting Park.
Thank you for that. You know, as the potential future mayor, you will often have to make decisions with not all of the information that you would want to have to make that decision. When is a time when you had to make a decision with only partial information, and what did you do?
So this is where I think it's really important, someone's lived experience. I've lived every challenge the city faces, right? I'm a product of public housing, first in my house to go to college, watch my mother and my family struggle. So for me, a decision is always based on how is this going to impact the most vulnerable? And are we doing this for short-term gain, or are we thinking about people, not programs? And so because I've had to make those kinds of decisions my entire life, for me, a decision is how would this impact the people that I represented in my district or in Hunting Park that I lived with. Because I think too many times, whether we're in government or we're in the private sector, and look, I'm a policy girl, whole on policy, but ultimately when the rubber meets the road, how does it help people?
Can you give an example of a time when you had to help people with policy and making that decision, and what that was like?
So, we're going through that right now when we look at health and human services and our challenges with mental health and opioid addiction in particular. I live in the 80s where the crack epidemic really decimated Hunting Park, right? We arrested our way out of that. We disrupted families. And then I'm elected to serve a district where the opioid addiction, we have asked poor Black and brown people to shoulder the burden of a crisis, worldwide crisis, but specifically the most vulnerable community in the city to do that. And so juggling, getting folks to understand harm reduction and meeting people where they are, but also getting people to understand that recovery is a lifetime journey and that ultimately family reunification and a reform system can work so that it's not an either or. That's not what we have in the city. We have essentially concentrated a problem and overburdened a community. So the civic leaders that I work with who are incredibly resilient getting them to understand that I lived Hunting Park and that didn't work, but at the same time trying to get them to understand that this is my child who's working through this and getting traumatized. This is my child, balancing those interests and saying that safety comes from when everyone is safe and when everyone is treated with dignity. So it's really hard to have those tough discussions with people and humanize the challenge.
Completely. You served multiple terms on City Council. How has your approach changed during that time? What do you do differently, or what did you do differently towards the end of your time?
I don't know. Nutter might say I was easier on Kenny than him. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm a process person. You know, my background is very process oriented. So in the beginning, what I saw in council, and you know, in our freshman class, which was the best freshman class ever, Bill Green, Curtis Jones, and I, you know, we came from very different perspectives. And for me, when you're trying to create transformative change, you have to understand that you're disrupting people's safe space and then having those challenging conversations. So when I did business tax reform and I had to sit with the Chamber of Commerce and people who wrote tax policy who were trying to tell me that their tax policy was good for their regional members, and I was saying to them, well, I'm a Philadelphia legislator and I need tax policy to be good for Philadelphia-based businesses, but willing to have those hard conversations and say, how do we move forward, right? So that the conversation is one that is respectful, you hear people, and ultimately you make a decision. And in council, as we say, 6 votes gets you to 9, and sometimes it gets you to 12, and you get it done.